Alt season could start at any minute. There is a secret switch, and all the Fed has to do is flip it on, and they would make every alt season in the past seem like a joke. In this video, we're gonna break down what is that switch. Will they flip it, and what will happen if they do? If that sounds good, like and subscribe down below, and let's figure out just what I'm talking about. Now guys, the switch that I'm talking about here is money printing. Money printer go burr, also known as QE or quantitative easing. This is when the Federal Reserve turns on the money printers, issues new currency units, and buys up bonds off the open market. This drastically expands their balance sheet, and as a result, pushes massive amounts of money into the financial system, giving altcoins and all other risk assets a tremendous boost. In previous alt cycles, this has been what we've needed and really what has sparked the massive run-ups that we've seen. Massive liquidity, massive run-up in alts, everyone's happy. So you have a look on your screen, you can see it here. This right here is alt season. This is the alt season of last cycle, and this is the Fed injecting massive amounts of money into the system and buying back bonds, government debt, and subsequently sending risk assets a lot higher. You can see it, Treasury QE. This is the Treasury printing money. This is QE, regular QE. This is the Fed printing money. And then not QE, this is kind of a little bit of a hidden tactic. And we'll talk about that later on in this video. Now, the connection, look at the run up in crypto. We have here in white, we have the United States Central Bank balance sheet, and then we have the others here in red. Notice the connection? As this goes higher, others goes up as well. Because more money in the financial system, more liquidity means higher altcoin prices. So if that's all there is to it, why not end the video right here? Well, I've actually got a little bit of bad news, but don't worry, towards the end of the video, you're actually going to see how this plays out in our favor. But the Fed might not actually be doing QE this time around. The last time Powell was asked about doing QE, he had this to say.
What kind of conditions would have to happen for you to start going back to quantitative easing?
So go to quantitative easing. That's a tool we tend to use when we're at the effective lower bound and we can't cut interest rates anymore. So nothing like what you're seeing in the current day. It's a different test for stopping quantitative tightening, but we would use QE going forward only in a situation where rates are at zero, and we're a long way from zero now.
So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but Powell seems averse to doing QE. What does that mean for us as investors? Are we not going to have an alt season? Far from it. And that's because quantitative easing isn't the only way for us to get an alt season, and the Fed aren't the only ones who can inject liquidity. For starters, there are other central banks around the world. This chart shows it right here. You've got the Fed here, but you've also got China, you've got Japan, you've got Europe, you've got England. All of them contributed to the massive run that we saw in 2021, not just the Fed. Yes, the Fed is the largest and the most consequential, but if push comes to shove, other central banks can push money into the financial system to help us out in times of need. And the way it's looking, they might have to. Growth of Fed liquidity trending down, forecasted. This gray area here is the projected territory. This is what we're projecting to see happen. We might see a little bit of a spurt up, and then we're going to have a pullback down. This right here may be the bear market. This is where liquidity drops off a cliff. And this right here, this cliff, this is about mid-2026. This is where crypto guru Powell actually thinks that the liquidity cycle could top this year. That makes actually a lot of sense to me. In between now and then, what are we going to see? We're not seeing what we saw last time. This gray zone right here, U.S. Treasury is held by the Fed SOMA. It's basically the Fed central bank. That's basically the Fed's balance sheet. You're seeing that they're actually selling right here. They're not buying. They're selling. And end investor flows is basically just outside buyers. Government bonds held by banks. So this is the private banks. We've done videos describing how the private banks are coming in to buy bonds. But this is it. This is the only bond buying that we're seeing from end investors, basically private investors, held by banks. That's private banks like JP Morgan, whatever. And then the Fed is actually selling bonds. This is quantitative tightening. This is what we're in right now. This is where the Fed, instead of buying bonds, they're actually selling bonds. So in terms of the Fed, we actually have a not so great liquidity situation right now. The rest of the world is printing money, and the US is actually getting liquidity into markets via different means. But as far as the Fed goes, they're really not helping us out. Is this going to change? That's the big question. But really, I think a better question is, does it need to change? And so we've established now that quantitative easing, money printing from the Fed, is how we get these massive alt seasons. Troublingly, it doesn't seem like the Fed is ready to do that. They're pulling money out of the system instead of pushing it back in. Yes, other central banks can help contribute, but the Fed and the United States are the biggest contributors to global liquidity. Without them on board, we're not going to get the alt season that we want. And so the big question now is, how will the US get money into the system? Well, there's one of two ways. So the first way is getting Powell out. And that's something that we know is going to happen. Trump has been very aggressive with his rhetoric towards Powell. He's basically told us in no uncertain terms that he's getting ready to kick Powell out. In May, when Powell's term ends, he's no longer going to be the chair of the Federal Reserve. And so Trump may put a new person in there who starts QE back up. Forget about what Powell said to the Senate last year, talking about we need to get interest rates down to 0% before we do QE. They might slash interest rates aggressively to 2% and then fire off the money printers. Who knows? That very well could happen, and it actually might be advised. I got Darius Dale here, one of the best to do it. He's a macro analyst, and he's going to break down what he thinks Trump could do to help reverse this process of quantitative tightening that we're in currently, pulling money out of the system. Have a watch.
One thing they can do in this sort of quote unquote hostile takeover of the Fed, if you listen to certain sources, they can stop this ridiculous policy of selling down the mortgage-backed securities. Right now, if you look at the Fed share of the MBS market, it's down to right around 16% of total. It was up at 23% of total. Why can't it go back to 23%? Why isn't it at 30%?
So what Darius is talking about here, when he talks about selling down the mortgage-backed securities, that's quantitative tightening. That's the Fed pulling money out of the system. That's the Fed reducing its balance sheet. We want the Fed to put money back into the system. We want the Fed to increase its balance sheet. That's quantitative easing. What Darius is describing is quantitative tightening. And so what he's saying is that the hostile takeover that Trump could do at the Fed by putting in his own people, putting in Fed governors like Stephen Miran, trying to fire Lisa Cook, putting in Chris Waller and Michelle Bowman, and then essentially putting in his own chair, that's the hostile takeover he's talking about. What they could do after that takeover is complete is start quantitative easing again. And you can see here that it's projected that the new Fed is going to start easing rates compared to the Powell Fed. Powell Fed here looks like they're keeping it around 4%, maybe a little bit higher, maybe a little bit lower. The new Fed projected to go down towards 3% and lower than 3%. So in theory, they could slash rates aggressively and start quantitative easing. That's one way that they could do it. Now, the other way they could do it would be, and this is what they're doing right now. Now, whether or not they continue to do it has yet to be seen. But one thing they could do is they could do it through the Treasury and what's being called Treasury QE. And you can see that. And I told you we'd come back to this chart. That's this in black here. And you can see that this is really the primary mechanism that they've been using to get liquidity into markets. If you were in crypto in late 2023, you remember the run-up that we had going into 2024. And so what this is Janet Yellen injecting over $1 trillion into the financial system through the Treasury. That created a massive run-up for risk assets. You remember the run-up of 2023, the late 2023 into 24. That's exactly what that was. And it's projected to continue. It's projected to continue that the Treasury is going to be the one injecting liquidity and not the Fed. And we've actually done a video on this. We break down Treasury QE in depth if you want to learn more about it, but we're going to cover it in this video in a little less detail, but just so you have an idea, the ones who are buying this debt, so the Treasury issues debt out, injects liquidity. Who buys that debt? Well, it's the private banks. It's the private banks, not the central banks, and you can see that here. You can see central bank, United States banks balance sheet, this is the private banks, they have been buying it, and it has the same effect on altcoins. Again, we have the private banks here in white, we have the others, the altcoin market here in red, and you can see the connection. It's the exact same as with it's the exact same as with the central bank. Central bank liquidity goes higher, altcoins go higher. Private bank liquidity goes higher, altcoins go higher. Liquidity is the main driver of asset prices. And this is something that a lot of people know. Really what it comes down to is how are they going to get that money into the system? How are they going to get it done? At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter how they get it done as long as they get it done. And on this channel, we're going to keep you up to date with how they're getting it done, when they're going to get it done, and to what extent they're going to get it done. So if that sounds good to you, like and subscribe down below, get it done. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the next one.